Hello, everyone, and welcome to Monday night of Monsoon Awareness Week. We had a great conversation last night as we did kind of the introduction to Monsoon Awareness Week, and we went over all the 5 kind of threats that we'll be highlighting this week, which are, let's see if I can remember them off the top of my head, heat, which is what we're going to be talking about tonight, downburst winds, which is what we'll talk about tomorrow night, blowing dust is Wednesday night. I believe lightning is going to be on Thursday, and flash flooding will be on Friday's discussion. So, like I said, we had a great discussion last night. Tonight, we're going to be focusing specifically on heat, and we've got a great panel set up. Let me introduce myself. My name is Tim Bryce. I am a meteorologist with the National Weather Service in El Paso, Texas. Also joining me on the video call tonight is Miss Marissa Pazos, who is also a meteorologist in the El Paso office. As I work on down the line here, we've got Dan, which is the warning coordination meteorologist in Las Vegas. And we have Alex Tardy, who is the WCM, the warning coordination meteorologist in San Diego. And San Diego, monsoon, we'll talk about that here in a bit. And just slipping in under the wire is Paul Enriquez. Paul, pronounce your last name. I can never say it right.
Geth.
Yes. See, I was so close.
So close.
Paul is out of the Phoenix office, so thank you for joining us. And I'm not going to say any of us have more or less to do with heat, because all of our offices deal with heat in different ways. But I think the epicenter of heat for the Southwest seems to be Phoenix on many occasions. Though Dan, I will tell you, I was on vacation once in Vegas several years ago, and it was painfully hot there. I can remember that as well. So we are looking forward to having a great conversation today about heat. Feel free to tweet us if you have a question on Twitter. The hashtag is hashtag M as in mother, A as in apple, W as in wheelbarrow 2017. So that's 2017. Or simply just use the YouTube chat. I think a lot of people got a benefit out of that last night. And so it's probably easier if you're watching this on YouTube just to chat away, enter a chat comment there on YouTube. And we will try to answer your questions and try to keep them, aimed at heat. But kind of as we roll into the conversation here, a lot of times we're very focused on the monsoon change. Basically, we'll define again, the monsoon is just a seasonal change in the winds. And as we get those seasonal change in the winds, it brings in a lot of moisture, and that helps to fuel those thunderstorms. So heat is not usually what you would think about as a monsoon threat. But as many of us know, being in the Southwest, heat is definitely a problem. And it's actually one of those things that, let's see what Ms. Marissa has here. Oh, yes, a beautiful graphic. It's one of the underrated killers. As a matter of fact, hey Dan, heat, you don't read about heat killing a whole lot of people, but I believe it's the #1 weather killer on average for the United States. Why don't we hear more about it?
It is. We don't. And the way I like to say it is, if you were watching if you were a foreigner watching nothing but American weather-related TV, you'd see a lot of tornadoes. You'd see a lot of hurricanes. You wouldn't see anything on heat. Very rarely. Heat it's not photogenic. You can't take a picture of it. With hurricanes, we give them names, but there's no heat wave. There's no heat wave Dave. We don't name these heat waves as such. I use the example, while a terrible tragedy, the tornado that hit Joplin, Missouri, killed 160 people in 2011. And in 2011, that was 1 year, one place, one location. The odds of them being hit again with a tornado of that magnitude in our lifetime is nearly zero. However, heat kills a couple dozen people on average just in our Las Vegas area responsibility every year. We get 15 to 20, sometimes more every year. And it's sneaky in a way because you go out and you don't prepare for it. You're thinking it's just a hot day. And then all of a sudden, if you haven't prepared for it, especially in Las Vegas here, we have a whole lot of tourists who may not be fully prepared for this kind of heat. And next thing you know, we're having heat-related illness and fatalities.
Yeah, up on the screen, everybody should be seeing now kind of the weather fatalities for 2016. And as you can see, on average, now it wasn't the case last year. Actually, flooding was the #1 killer just last year. But on average, if you take either the 10 or the 30-year average, you can see right there in the middle that heat is the big killer of people, and it does pick off its people one at a time here and there, and it's kind of like very similar to lightning that we don't see a lot of, as far as one person here, one person there just doesn't make the news, and it's tragic, but it is true. When you mentioned people going out, especially tourists who aren't used to the heat, that they might not be prepared for it. Miss Marissa, what are some of the signs? There's two kinds of heat illnesses. What are the signs? What are those two heat illnesses, and what are some of the things that people should be looking for?
So I actually have a really great graphic about that, and two of the signs are heat stroke and heat exhaustion, and both of those are extremely dangerous, especially across the desert Southwest and in any place that gets the monsoon. You can see my graphic here. So we have heat exhaustion both in English and Spanish.
Muy bien.
Gracias. So we have, fainting and dizziness, but headache kind of comes on with heat stroke. So everything starts at the top and kind of moves its way down. Sweating, vomit, no sweating for heat stroke. So that's kind of interesting. If you have heat stroke, you don't have sweating. Cool palms and body temperature rising very quickly with heat stroke. Nauseous to your stomach for both heat stroke and heat exhaustion. And muscle cramps. Both of these graphics we have on our website just to keep people kind of reminded what heat stroke and heat exhaustion looks like. Both very important things. And drink water, stay in shady areas, sunscreen, all those things help avoid both of these situations.
Right. Now, there is a difference in degrees because as far as heat exhaustion is concerning, but and you need to be aware of it, but I believe heat stroke is the one that's the deadly one.
That's the 911 that you should call, yeah. That's the deadly one.
Very true. Very good. So people need to be just looking out for those symptoms. If you start to feel dizzy and just don't feel yourself, break. I think if you start with that headache and not feeling well, take a break, get out of the heat and the shade, get into an air-conditioned area, and you'll be feeling hopefully a little better pretty quickly. But, some of the challenges for us that we have seen in the Weather Service is that sometimes people can't get out of the heat. I know a lot of people who are on fixed income, they don't, they say, I don't want to run my air conditioning. And it can definitely be a challenge, especially when we don't cool off at night. And that heat just is unrelenting day and night. I know that, I know Paul, I know that you guys, I know Tucson are looking at heat highlights for this coming weekend. I know we in El Paso are also looking at heat highlights. So what exactly is the difference? I don't know if you can, I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but I was wondering, Paul, if you could tell me the difference between like a heat advisory, a heat warning.
So we have some policy now in the Southwest offices where we actually will only issue the heat warnings. Okay. So traditionally, Weather Service, we have the advisories and we have warnings. So warnings are a higher danger than the advisories. Advisories are kind of nuisance. You kind of have to go out of your way a little bit to put yourself in the danger. The warnings indicate that the thing is coming for you, coming to get you, basically, like a tornado warning, a flash flood warning, and in this case, a heat warning.
Very good. And you guys, I know it's actually a kind of a good time to be talking about this because we are looking at later on this week some extremely hot temperatures. What are you forecasting for highs there in Phoenix towards the end of the week? Oh, you got your graphic. If you'll just slide it down or up.
Right. So right now we do have our office and the Tucson office. We do have an excessive heat watch out for later in the week. So I believe they start Friday and continue through the weekend. So we're many days ahead of a potential heat wave coming up. If I look at what we're currently forecasting, we exceed 110. We're up around 112 for Friday and Saturday, and then we get even warmer Sunday into early next week. So the temperatures, they're going to forecast to be very hot, but this isn't what we necessarily use to determine when we will issue our heat watches and heat warnings. We have a tool, a product that we've been developing for about 5 years now, which we call the heat risk. And what that does is put the forecast high and low temperatures from all the different weather offices into it uses climatology to compare the time of year and helps us identify which locations at what time of year are going to be too hot, basically. And so this is what I'm showing right now. Go ahead.
Yeah, and that's a great tool. I'll let you explain it here in a minute because I wanted to, I had it pulled up on one of my tabs because I wanted to highlight it. You guys have been doing work on this. It's a little challenging to find. I was trying to Google search. I'll read off the address to everybody, and then I'll tell you the search I used to kind of find it. But the address to find this tool, which is a great tool, is www.wrh.noaa.gov/WRH/ I believe heat risk. The search that I did real quick was NWS WRH heat risk, and I think it finally popped up as the second. Do you guys have it on your homepage someplace linked?
Yeah, there's not. If you go to any of the weather offices in the Western U.S. and you come to our main page, if you hover over the forecast tab here, you'll get the little drop-down menu, and there's experimental heat risk.
Very good.
Right here, and that will take you to that website.
So if you go to weather.gov and either click on Phoenix or just type in the word Phoenix, you'll go to the web page, and then you can hover over forecast, and there you'll find it there. Because I like it. It's a great tool. We'll talk about in a little while, or maybe compare and contrast this tool to what a lot of people are familiar with, which is the heat index.
So the heat index is one index we have, obviously. It takes account the temperature and the relative humidity to try to come up with an apparent temperature. So what would the temperature be if you actually accounted for that humidity? When you have rather high humidity, then the heat index or the apparent temperature is going to be higher than what the air temperature is. But if you have very dry air, then the apparent temperature, the heat index, is going to be lower than the air temperature. And that's because the drier the air is, the more readily water or your sweat will evaporate, and so the cooler you will feel. And then the flip side, the more humid it is outside, the harder it is for water to evaporate, the harder it is for sweat to evaporate off your skin, and the hotter you're going to feel. So that's one tool that's available out there to use to identify, how hot does it feel.
Definitely. We just started working with looking at the heat risk, and I really like it as a tool because it doesn't take humidity into effect, but it does use climatology, time of year, and things like that. What are some of the other things that it uses to calculate that value?
So the big thing, and let me see if I have a slide in here in a presentation we recently did. Oh, I don't. So heat risk is a way for us to compare, like you're mentioning, our high and our low temperatures to the climatology for the time of year. So it does not take into account humidity directly, but we do it in a somewhat smart way, in that we know that those overnight low temperatures, they're only going to be high when it's humid outside, basically. So when you have real humid air mass in place, that helps keep those overnight low temperatures up. And so we can use that fact to compare it to the climatology, and that kind of takes humidity into account without actually taking humidity into account. So the heat risk product, we take that high temperature, we take that low temperature, we compare it to the climatology, we pass it through an algorithm, and it puts out how hot are these temperatures relative to the climatology for this location and for this time of year. So technically speaking, a little bit, it's looking at 95th percentiles, basically. So, pretty high temperatures for the climatology. And the output then are going to be these different threat categories, basically. Is it a low, medium, low, moderate, high, or a very high heat risk? So we are operating this now on the web page that you mentioned earlier. We are generating this information across the entire Western U.S. and into some other areas too where the domain covers. So this is taking our high and low temperature, so even for your area, Paso, for all New Mexico, is being generated as well. So just looking at the output, we can see, how hot is it going to get? And all of our offices in the far Southwest, so California, Nevada, Utah, and Arizona, we're using this output now to decide when and where we are going to issue those heat watches and heat warnings. And for higher elevation areas, we'll issue the heat advisory still. But anywhere where we have red or magenta is where we have a higher, very high risk. And that's where we're going to be putting those watches and warnings out. So you can see right here now, just looking at the forecast information. So we're starting to get some, if we look at Thursday, really not much red showing up on the map on Thursday, just a few areas here and there. But if we flip to Friday, we see it starting to come out. And especially as we head into the weekend, we're going to have some pretty widespread areas of the high, and by Monday, a lot of purple in there, a lot of very high risk. So it's going to be a very hot weather coming up in the next couple of days for the Southwest. Even though this is a hot part of the country and it's our hot time of year, this is going to be hot even by those standards.
Right. So, and right now it keeps getting, it keeps raising the bar as you go through. I see for our area, I think we are getting, by Monday, we're getting a little intrusion of, I'm going to say, quote, cooler air. It's actually some moisture, I think, moving in. So I think we're slicing maybe a few degrees off of our highs. Well, not a whole lot there, but by Monday, I think we're not as serious a situation. But I do think for El Paso, in particular, the weekend is looking very warm. Hey, Alex, you're out and about. We're looking at a heat situation coming up weekend. What are some of the basic heat tips or heat, what's the word I'm looking for? Safety tips that people can use?
Yeah, thanks everyone. What Paul mentioned at the end there, the heat watches, the warnings, the advisories, and the heat risk, that's the key into preparing for this upcoming event, because what it's telling us is that it's not just normally hot because it's summer or near summer, and it's not just normally hot because it's a desert or dry, but it's unusually hot. And in those situations, it becomes dangerous. You don't think of heat out in San Diego too often, and that makes it even more dangerous in this region, in this part of the West, because we're just not used to it. So once in a while, a couple times a year, every year, we seem to get temperatures that are 90, 100 degrees, even here in San Diego, and it can become dangerous. I'll give you an example. Last year, we had an event in June, and the temperature was 103, 104 degrees right here in San Diego. And there was a lot of activities going on. It was a Saturday. The schools were having soccer games, and people were doing what they think is their normal activities. And people were starting to get sick. We talked about heat exhaustion earlier, and we saw a lot of that occurring up to the point where people were even having to be hospitalized because it was so extreme. So what can you do to prevent that? Well, first of all, you got to pay attention to the forecast and be aware that something is much more extreme than it usually is. And when you have a heat warning or advisory, that's your first indication. Then you can wear clothing that's appropriate for that type of weather. White clothing, light colored clothing. Drink lots of fluid. That's the key. Non-alcoholic fluid, water, lots of water, never enough water. If you feel like you're dehydrated, it's probably too late. You're already feeling some of the symptoms of that extreme heat. You can avoid the time of day. Right now, it's 6 o'clock on my time, and this would be a good time to maybe do your activities on a really hot day. Not noon, not 1 o'clock, not even 11 a.m. in the middle of the day. Those type of things are what you can do to avoid the heat. Now, sometimes you can't avoid it because, let's say you work outside in the heat and you have to work on the roads or construction. And in those cases, you have to do all the things we just talked about, but you also have to take frequent breaks. taking frequent breaks from the heat is ideal to avoiding the heat exhaustion and ultimately the heat stroke that could set in as well. And the thing about heat, and we talked a little bit about this, it's sneaky. It comes upon you. You feel like you can handle it. It's not that bad at first. And then it's an accumulative impact, and it can really sneak up on you. I remember seeing people mowing grass and doing work outside, and they weren't taking breaks. And before you know it, they were inside, and they felt like they were going to vomit, and their face was turning bright pink or red, and they really had too much, and they didn't feel good all night. So you want to avoid that situation of the heat exhaustion. Those measures, drinking lots of water, taking frequent breaks, wearing light-colored clothing, and then most importantly, go inside or take frequent breaks. Stay out of the peak of the day. In San Diego here, one problem we have is it's not as easy as going indoors because even on the coast, some locations don't even have air conditioning. So if you don't have air conditioning, you really have to look at other alternatives. And what we call it out here is a cooling center. And some other government facilities offer cooling centers that open up when it gets 90, 100 plus degrees, and even out here. And that's what you have to go to actually cool down, because you may not have the option to just go into your house. There was a situation last year where schools in Coronado had to close because the schools didn't have air conditioning, and the temperature inside the school was getting in the mid 80s. So those are the type of situations that, you might take for granted, that you just have air conditioning or you have a car that works well, and that may not always be the case. So preparing for this type of heat, like we just talked about, is critical, and following those steps will help minimize the impacts.
Very true. Miss Marissa, can you pull up on your screen the CWA map again, please?
Yeah.
Because I want, yesterday we had on the call, we had someone from we had Jared from the forecast office in Phoenix. We had someone from the Tucson office, and Miss Marissa, and we went over their areas of responsibility. I want to real quickly, hey Dan, describe the area of responsibility for Vegas.
We have a pretty large area of responsibility. We cover all of southern Nevada, as well as Mojave County in northwestern Arizona, and a large portion of the desert area in southeast California, including Death Valley National Park. And we cover that area. It's the third largest area of responsibility in the lower 48 states. So that presents its own problems. But yeah, heat is prevalent in our area.
Yeah, that is a huge area. So, what are co-op trips like to Death Valley?
Well, that's actually a pretty easy one. It's a fun one. It's enjoyable. 3 years ago, or 4 years ago now, we did a big symposium out there when we had the 100th anniversary of the 134-degree temperature, the world record temperature out there. And on that day, we all went out to the co-op at measurement time, and it was only 120 degrees. And I know those in Phoenix can experience that almost every year, but they're regularly up in the 125 to 127 every year. You get a few of those days.
That is crazy. Hey, yeah. Alex, describe your area of responsibility for San Diego, because I think people picture San Diego, but I don't think they realize how far inland you guys go.
Yeah, they do picture San Diego. We're all guilty of it. I was too before I moved out here. I pictured San Diego, and I thought of a beach, maybe 75 degrees, a couple tall buildings, expensive food, those type of things. But our area of responsibility goes all the way up to near Barstow, where Dan area ends. And then it goes all the way out to Palm Springs, the Salton Sea, where Paul's area ends, out in that area of the desert. And then, of course, we stop at the Mexico border, and then we go up into Orange County, all that area. And then we go out in the ocean, all the way out to Catalina, near Catalina and San Clemente Island, if everyone knows where that is. So in that area, we have mountains that go up to 11,500 feet. And then we have desert areas, a lot like Dan and Paul, that are sea level or below and experience temperatures at least a couple times a year of 120. So, but then we have the coastal climate, which is controlled by the cooler Pacific Ocean. And those areas, tend to be the kind of the classic San Diego. And so on any given day, when we have a coastal marine layer, it can be 70 degrees, and inland it can be 110. So we can see a 40-degree difference. And we've already seen that during the month of June this year. So it can vary quite a bit. And, there's 11 million people that live in that area I just described. And I don't even know how many people visit. It's in the millions every month.
Wow. Hey, Miss Marissa, describe the El Paso area for everyone who's not familiar with it.
So El Paso, we cover all of southern New Mexico. You could have seen it on the map before. All of southern New Mexico and very far west Texas. We go as far north as Cloudcroft, New Mexico, or True the Consequences, and as far east as Hudspeth County. So we butt up against Albuquerque, Midland, and Tucson.
Yeah, and I think we don't have any marine, but we also have almost a 10,000-foot mountain to work with, a lot of topography to work with. And when we get later on in the week, when we start talking about flash flooding and lightning, the topography really comes into play. But we're not going to do that today. Not today. We're going to stay focused on heat. Hey, Paul, describe real quickly for everybody the area of responsibility for Phoenix.
Obviously, the Phoenix area, so Maricopa County and most of Pinal County, which we share with Tucson. We do have some higher elevated areas to the north and east of the Phoenix area, including the Globe Miami area. And we sweep westward across the deserts of southwest Arizona towards Yuma, and then into southeast California, including the El Centro area and Imperial Valley and Joshua Tree National Park.
Wow. So we all of our areas of responsibility cover kind of a diverse, challenging area, and that can make it challenging. That I know that for us, the hottest spot of our CWA, I know that Phoenix, probably you guys are the hottest spot, but for like San Diego, you guys got to kind of look off to the desert regions, and same thing for Vegas gets hot as you know, but it's actually not probably the hottest spot in your CWA, or I shouldn't say CWA, your area of responsibility. Dan, is that correct?
Yeah, well, the hottest area we have the distinction of normally having the two hottest cities or locations on any given day. If you look throughout the summer, where the hottest temperature in the country was, it's more often than not, it's either in Bullhead City, Arizona, or at Death Valley. And so we've got those areas, and what makes them special is they're at very low elevation. Obviously, Death Valley is below sea level. Our co-op station there is at Furnace Creek, which is 190 feet below sea level, and Bullhead City is right along the Colorado River, where you're at a much lower elevation than any other part of our area outside of Death Valley.
Why does I think people might wonder, why does being below sea level does that make sense, that question?
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Oh, sure. So why does being below sea level seem to make it hotter? Is it because it's below sea level, or is it just because it's a very low elevation?
It's strictly because it's a very low elevation. When the atmosphere mixes out, as we all know, in the mountain, we call it mixing out in the because overnight we get cooler temperatures at the surface, but the air mass, whatever the air mass is over your head, kind of determines what the temperature of the air could possibly be. And during the summer, when we heat the ground, we will really heat up that ground, and we'll do what we call mixing out that layer of cooler air that occurred overnight. And then what we do is, and then as such, the lower you get in elevation, we all know that if you go up in the mountains, it's cooler. If you go up the mountains, it's cooler. It's because you're higher in elevation. In the atmosphere, the troposphere, the lowest level of the atmosphere cools as you go up. Same is true as you go down. So if you go to a lower elevation, it's going to be warmer than the adjacent higher elevations, which is why Death Valley is often the hottest area in the country.
Ooh. Well, you said that when you said that it was below sea level, I figured people might wonder why, if that was something magical about being below sea level, and it turns out it is. Very good. Now, like I said, we are looking at very hot temperatures for the end of this week, and Alex went over some of the basic heat tips, but I'm going to put everybody on the spot here. What are some of maybe heat tips that people wouldn't normally think of? We went over the basic ones: lots of hydration, take breaks, stay out of the heat of the day, maybe do stuff early in the morning or later in the evening. What are some maybe, and Dan had mentioned that they have a lot of tourist people there in San Diego or in Las Vegas, and Alex in San Diego. What are some of the not so common kind of heat safety tips that people need to be aware of? And I will pick Paul. What's one that you could think of?
I think one of the big ones I would share with folks is that, check on other folks that may be more susceptible to the heat than you are. So, most people do have ways to mitigate, and accommodate themselves from the heat. They have air conditioning in their house or their office space, so they can go somewhere. So, they may not work outside, so they are okay. The heat warnings we put out aren't necessarily for them, but there are other folks who don't have those means. And here in the Phoenix area and most areas, Maricopa County, a lot of the people that get impacted by the heat are homebound people on that fixed income, like you mentioned a little bit earlier. But just checking on those folks can, seeing if they're okay can make a big difference, just a wellness check. So, interacting with some of our first responders here, we hear about all the calls that they get when it starts getting really hot out and people having issues with medication, with illnesses that they have. And sometimes there's no one there to check on those people. And unfortunately, they do die. Looking at Maricopa County alone, last year we did have 130 heat-caused deaths. So, I mean, that's a substantial amount of people dying from heat. And a lot of them do happen to be homebound. So that's one piece of advice I would give is if there's some folks out there you're friends with or, other neighbors, what have you, just check up on them and make sure they're okay.
Yeah, now you did mention air conditioning, and the question that I have, in El Paso, a lot of people have what's called swamp coolers. They work good when it's dry and when it's not super duper hot. But I know here in El Paso, once the temperature starts pushing well above 100, like 105, 107, it just can't cool the house. It doesn't matter how dry it is. And the way the evaporative coolers works is actually quite ingenious. It's very simple. You just take water. You have a box on your roof, you pump up water up to the top, and then it filters through either cardboard or straw, and then you draw air through that, and it's an evaporative process. And as you evaporate that water, it cools that air, and then you funnel it down into your house. But I know for a fact that if some moisture moves in and we get a little moisture in the air, those coolers aren't efficient. I know that right now our relative humidity in El Paso is like Marissa, is it like 10% or something like that? It's pretty low, or maybe even single digits.
That's right.
So the air coming out of my swamp cooler right now, it feels like the refrigerator. But you here by this weekend, when it gets above 105 for El Paso, or we raise that dew point or that relative humidity, it doesn't work as well. Paul, do people have regular air conditioning that I think a lot of people are familiar with, or do a lot of people still have swamp coolers?
The majority of the swamp coolers are not very common anymore. Any newer construction, the retrofitting that happens, it's going to be more typical air conditioning. So even still, I mean, there are a sizable portion of the people that when the county goes in and looks at who unfortunately has died from heat-caused illnesses, a lot of people did have air conditioning. I mean, air conditioning penetration in the Phoenix area is exceptionally high. It's something like 98% or something like that. I mean, basically everyone has air conditioning. The problem becomes that you can't afford to run the air conditioning. I mean, bills can get very, very high. In this part of the country, it's not unusual to have a $200, $300, $400, $500 bill during the summertime. You know, that's not affordable to a lot of people. Sometimes the air conditioner is not broken either, so, or the air conditioner is broken, so there's issues with that, getting people to repair. So there are laws in place, state laws, that, you know, if air conditioner is broken, tenant, you know, landlord has to get it fixed within a certain amount of time. Power companies, when there's extreme heat events, they're not allowed to cut off electricity so that folks can still have the air conditioning. So, I mean, there are things in place, but still, you know, not everyone has that ability to help cool themselves.
Wow. Hey, Dan, in Las Vegas, how do people keep cool there? Is it mainly air conditioning, or there's a lot of people use swamp coolers?
It's mostly air conditioning here. There are a few that still have swamp coolers. You see them around, mainly in older neighborhoods. But yeah, we're primarily air conditioning here. It works much better.
It does. It does. I'm still on a swamp cooler, but I you know, the upside of it is that it for sure gives you cold air, but like Paul mentioned, it can come at a price, and sometimes it's a price that's a little too high. Hey, Alex, you mentioned that some people don't even have air conditioning in your area. What is the primary way of, in maybe some of the hotter areas, that people try to get cool? And I believe you're muted right now. He's looking how to unmute. Unmute. Can you get it unmuted? I don't think I can unmute you. Boo-hoo. Alrighty, while he's working on that, we will just continue to chat away. Hey, I'll ask Miss Marissa, do you guys have air conditioning or a swamp cooler?
I have both at my house, actually.
Oh,
so
nice.
yeah, I know, right? Some houses in El Paso have both. We were just actually discussing earlier today with our friends just south of the border. A lot of them, due to their economic situation, do not have air conditioning at all, too. And they're not in the mountains. They're not in higher elevations at all. They're down in the lowlands just like us without air conditioning. So we have to watch out for that.
And you mentioned that for a lot of people don't realize that El Paso sits on the border, and we have in just right next door to us is Juarez, and that is a city of over 1 million people. And like Marissa says, that they are a lot of people down there are financially challenged, and they don't have any kind of air conditioning at all. I think Alex has got his unmuted. Can you say something there, Alex?
Sorry about that.
That's okay. You're good.
I realized I muted it. So in our area, just like was mentioned, we have an economic challenge where people either choose to not use their air conditioning or they choose to not install it. So a lot of times when you buy a house, even in the coast, even in the metro area of San Diego, it's optional. So you may get plumbing for air conditioning, or you may get nothing. Now the new construction, they at least put plumbing so that it's set up for central air. A lot of people, even my neighbors here, will choose not to purchase it. It was one of the first things that we purchased when we bought our house, just because it just seems like an essential. So a lot of times our air conditioner is free, and that's the sea breeze, or that's the breeze off the ocean. You know, things are changing. So schools are becoming more adept in installing air conditioning, but believe it or not, places like right on the immediate coast still do not have air conditioning, or it's just not the most efficient or type of system set up. So it's starting to change, but here it's kind of hit or miss when you're within just a couple miles of the coast.
Wow, very interesting. Very interesting. Quite a diverse cooling just across the Southwest. So very interesting indeed. Let's see. Oh, we were talking about the kind of maybe not so well known or not as well heat safety tips. So I had asked Paul, and we kind of went down a rabbit hole there on air conditioning. Let me ask Dan, what would be a one maybe not so obvious heat tip that you could offer to people?
Well, I could give you one. Don't be complacent at night. It's in some areas, especially where we have in Las Vegas, we have a lot of activity going on at night, especially this upcoming weekend. We have the Electric Daisy Carnival coming to town, which is going to be 100,000 people outdoors at the Las Vegas Speedway overnight for 3 nights. So we've had incidents in the past where our low temperatures due to our rapid urbanization in Las Vegas, sometimes our low temperatures don't get below 90. And if you've been outside all day and it's 110 degrees and then it gets down to only 90 at night and you're up all night, and most of the people at these festivals aren't always in their, shall we say, normal frame of mind. They're not thinking about these things. So just again, if you're planning on doing any nocturnal outdoor activity, going out to one of these festivals or something, I would strongly recommend you bring a lot of water and follow all the safety tips that you would during the day, because you're not safe just because the sun goes down.
And you did mention real quickly the low temperatures at night. Can you talk real briefly about the importance of low temperature? It can be, if it's 100 degrees during the day, but then you drop back down to 65 at night. And, I think we all have gotten out on those mornings where you go out in the morning and you it just feels so cool and fresh, and it's nice. But like you're saying, how important is that low temperature not letting people kind of catch that break in adding to their heat stress on their systems, or keeping the houses just, they don't ever cool off. There's no way for them to cool off if they don't have an air conditioner. How important is that, if that low temperature stays up, like you said, near 80, or even for Phoenix or Vegas stays up near 90 degrees?
In my opinion, it's almost exponential once you start getting warmer in terms of the potential heat risks. Your body is there. It likes to be around in the 70s and 80s. That's where we would like to be all the time. And if we get into those temperatures where it's, your low is 90 and your high is 110 and you've been out in it the whole time, it's your body just never, your body's going to heat up during the day, but your body's just never going to cool down, because it's just never going to get that chance to cool down unless you've got some cool temperatures outdoors, unless you spend some time in air conditioning. And that becomes a real problem in Vegas, especially since we have a large homeless population, and they have very, very little opportunity to get cool in some of those nights.
Wow, that's very, I don't think people realize the importance of that low temperature and how important it is to, if it drops down, that we're able to cool our houses and just catch that break. Whereas when it stays up, it just kind of, exponentially, like you mentioned, magnifies the seriousness of the situation. That's just very, very impressive. I did want to remind anyone, if you guys had questions who are watching, feel free to tweet at us. You can see the hashtag there on the screen, MAW 2017, or on the YouTube chat on the streaming page that you're watching on. Feel free to hop in there with a quick question, and we'd be happy to answer them. Miss Marissa, if you had an unusual heat tip, what would it be? Or maybe not a not well publicized one.
I'm trying to think unpublicized, but I am a big proponent of the sunscreen. Even on the cloudy days, sometimes during the monsoon, we can get cloudier days and people neglect it, or they just neglect it because they're only going to be outside for 5 minutes, or something like that. So we just want to keep the reminder of get the sunscreen on. It's one more shield of protection that you can have from heat stroke or anything like that. So sunscreen all the way, and SPF 30 or above. It's really what we kind of preach if we can.
Very good. Alex, for you, what is perhaps a heat tip that you'd like to share with people that we haven't already talked about?
Yeah, take a look.
Oh, it's a black cat.
So it's not Halloween.
Tell us about your pets.
Yeah, my pets. So check on your pets. It's something I didn't talk about, but something that it's easy to neglect. And, the pets can suffer from the heat.
Uh-oh. He froze.
A good point.
Back here.
With the
no, it
pets,
definitely is. I don't know if you noticed earlier, everyone, but my my dog came and Miss Marissa noticed it, but my dog came and sat next to me. For sure, make sure that your pet has plenty of water. Make sure that it has a shady place. If your pet has to be outside, you've got to provide that shade and that water. We work very hard in my house. That we actually have a little doggy door, and the dog can come in and stay inside where it's cool, and then go outside to do its business or hang out. I always find it interesting. They go out and lay out in the sun, and then they come in and they cool off. So they they really seem to enjoy that. But it's because they know they can do that, and they come in, they drink. We have several bowls of water around the house so that they can, they can always go and get a drink. So I hope we can get Alex back here for the last few minutes of our talk. But that was a great point. He had his cat. Hey, the one tip I'd like to talk about, and maybe Marissa and Dan, we could talk about it all together, is, and it's not necessarily when it gets very hot, but it's kids and cars. And I do think I have a graphic here. Let me
I have one up as well, I think.
Go ahead. I'll share your screen here. Cancel, and let me share your screen. Oh yeah, there we go. It's good. So basically, it doesn't have to be super hot for kids and pets and cars. You should never leave a kid or a pet in a parked car while you just run in or something, because I've seen it too many times. People run into the convenience store, and before they know it, they've talked to the cashier, or they couldn't find what they were looking for, and that heat inside that car builds up very, very quickly. So there you can see the outside temperature. Even when it's 80 degrees, after 10 minutes of sitting in the car, it's almost 100 degrees. And after 20 minutes, it's 109. And I know that we continue to hear the tragic stories of people around the country that accidentally forget that their kids are in the back seat when they go to work. And I believe I have, let's see if I can show my screen here real quick. And it'll show up here in a second, I hope. But it talks about the U.S. child vehicular deaths. And so far, already this year, there have been 7 children that have died in cars in the United States. And you can see it's just the average looks like it's running at a little over 30, and that's unacceptable. And I know that the Weather Service has several campaigns to kind of help kind of prevent that. They have some cute sayings that help parents remember. One of them is look before you lock, and the other one is beat the heat, check the back seat. Dan, what can people do to kind of maybe help prevent this?
Yeah, just be vigilant about it. Make sure that your kids you should have your kids and your pets be cognizant of their need for care at all times, especially during hot weather. Another thing we talk about with pets is that we take for granted that the pavement gets extremely hot as well. And if you're walking your dog on the pavement, its paws are as hot as your feet would be if they were bare feet on the pavement. And so please understand the heat effect. We take it for granted, but the heat affects your pets, and the heat affects your children just as much, if not more, than you. And that goes for whether you're outdoors or inside a car.
Very true, very true. Ms. Marissa, what can you tell parents to help them? What's a tip that you could give them to help them remember?
Put something in the back seat, like a lunchbox or a briefcase, a backpack, whatever you take into work with you. Don't put it in the front with you or in your trunk. Try to put it in the back seat next to your child, just in case, because people get distracted, things go by, the drive in the morning can be long, so that'll help remind you. Yeah.
Do the same thing with a cell phone or a wallet or something as well.
Perfect. Yeah, anything. It does it exactly. Tim, I wanted to touch on cooling.
That was what I was going to suggest. Was the cell phone.
That there are cooling stations across, every warning area that we provide. So just kind of be aware of where maybe a cooling station is, or one where you could take someone, kind of like we mentioned earlier, a buddy system, checking on a partner, a friend, a neighbor, whoever. And if they need to go to a cooling station, you can go there. Public libraries are really good places. malls, movie theaters, anything like that. So that's really important. I know we don't typically have that on our website, but there's got to be a place. I think Tim has a website that kind of brings that up. But even still, even if you don't have a website, listen to the news or radios. They typically will talk about where the cooling stations are around the cities that we forecast for.
I had doing a little research for tonight's talk. I came across this. I know Paul had to drop off the call. He could talk a little more authoritatively about this, but these are the cooling stations that they have set up around the Phoenix area. And they actually break them up into like hydration stations, refuges where people can go to cool off. And then they also, once the Weather Service actually issues a heat warning, they actually open others as well to increase the number. Some are open kind of, I'm guessing, during the summer in general, and that may be like libraries and the mall and things like that. But during the emergency situations, when they issue a heat warning, they actually open other stations as well. So it's just a place for people to go and cool off, especially if you don't have air conditioning, if you don't have any way to cool your house. Get out and try to take advantage of these cooling stations so that we just don't want you to become a statistic. And that's what it comes down to. And it's not afraid to, don't be embarrassed to ask for help. People check on your neighbors, check on your elderly parents or your abuelos and your abuelas, your grandmas and grandfathers. Just make sure they're okay. You know what? If you know that the heat warning's been issued and you know that maybe grandma and grandpa don't have air conditioning at their house, maybe invite them to your house to spend a couple of nights and just give them a place to go or take everybody out to a movie or go eat in a restaurant, something like that, just so that they can catch some kind of break from the heat. I think would be just go a long, long way in helping lower, like we showed earlier, all of those heat deaths, over 130 on average for the last 30 years, heat deaths a year across the United States. And it's just too high. I haven't seen any questions come on either on Twitter or on YouTube. Again, we've got about maybe 5-8 more minutes. We're going to chat here. If you do have a question about the monsoon season and heat and any of your experiences or maybe some suggestions that you have, feel free to add those either via the hashtag MAW2017 or just right here on your YouTube stream, and you can just type it in there. There's a chat room there on the side of the stream. One thing I did want to talk about is that a lot of times being in the Southwest, we like to joke about things and we like to hear people say it's a dry heat. And so basically implying it's not so bad. You can handle that. Is that a myth or is that true? Can you talk to that? We do hear people say it's a dry heat, but it doesn't matter. In my opinion, it doesn't matter when it's like 105 to 110. Hot is hot. So can you kind of talk into that myth of it's a dry heat?
Well, it's not a dry heat. The whole idea with the monsoon, I'm going to show this graphic really quick, is that we're streaming up moisture from a different area into our area. So now it's no longer necessarily a dry heat anymore. And especially those people who are not used to moisture being in the air, and it's been a whole summer since the monsoon has kicked in, and they forgot, I guess, what was going on. They're not used to that rise in moisture level or humidity across the area. So although it is typically a dry heat, and like right now it will be a dry heat this summer or this next couple of days when the monsoon kicks in, and this is Monsoon Awareness Week, that's not necessarily fully dry heat.
Very true. And I know for people, we did talk about how so many people have air conditioning and not swamp coolers, but I know in El Paso, if I had to guess, I'd say it's about 50-50 as far as air conditioning and swamp coolers. And I am a swamp cooler person. So that once that moisture moves in, the temperatures may come down a few degrees, but the swamp coolers, the efficiency of them quickly starts to go down, and the house just doesn't cool off. And like I mentioned earlier, when it hits 105 to 108, the coolers can only cool so much, and the house still stays warm at night. So As you mentioned, it may be a dry heat, but hot is hot. That is for sure. Real quickly, I want to go. We had Alex and Paul had to drop off, but real quickly, I wanted to just have people talk. For Vegas, Dan, what is the record high temperature there in Vegas, if you know it off the top of your head?
I do. The record temperature in Las Vegas at the airport, which is not the hottest part of our Las Vegas Valley, but it's our official hottest, is 117. We've hit that multiple times. Last reached on June 30th, 2013. We had a tremendous heat wave that day.
Wow.
And then 117.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Well, I was going to say, and interesting to note, on that same day, this was 2 weeks before the 100th anniversary of the Death Valley 134. Death Valley hit 129.2, and at the time I'd been working with some weather historians on with the WMO, World Meteorological Organization, as well as Christopher Burt, who's an expert in weather records, and he had told me that was the hottest temperature recorded worldwide since 1942, and that was tied back to then, and it was the hottest temperature recorded reliably since the week of the record in 1913. It was pretty crazy hot day. We had all sorts of media out there hanging out on the Las Vegas Strip and doing live spots from there. It was quite an event.
Very good. I bet. Hey, Miss Marissa, what is El Paso's record high temperature
114 in 1994. So, and also a record event for us and a big event. I think I have a T-shirt that they sold documenting this day. I think my parents bought it for me.
I kind of dating myself. I started with the Weather Service in 1994 in April. So fortunately or unfortunately for me, I got to live through that record-setting heat wave in El Paso. And I can still remember when it was 113, 114 on several days, and then you'd get this slight breeze. It was like a blowtorch. It was very, very uncomfortable. And I know that people in Phoenix will say 114. They're actually going to see that this weekend. But we are certainly in El Paso not used to that kind of temperature. I know Phoenix is actually, we mentioned earlier about elevation. Phoenix is actually lower down in elevation. El Paso actually sits up at 4,000 feet. So we're kind of high in the atmosphere. So when we're hitting 100 to 105, it's a little uncomfortable, and like she calls it hot. It's true. And when we're going to be pushing 105, 106, maybe even a little warmer this weekend, that's when you start to get concerned. And so I just want to encourage everybody, not only in El Paso, but in Vegas, in Phoenix, and Tucson, and San Diego, and Albuquerque, even Albuquerque's area, especially the southern part of the area, we're going to see some very, very hot temperatures towards the end of this week into this weekend. And just start thinking about it now. So many people say, okay, yeah, whatever, it's going to be hot. And then all of a sudden it's Saturday and it's blazing hot. Start thinking ahead of time. Maybe make plans. Hey, maybe you haven't gone to the mountains. Maybe this is the weekend to drive up to the mountains. I know, Marissa, you went up to Cloudcroft, which is up at 8,000 feet. Was it last weekend?
Yeah, on Friday.
Yeah, so, and it's like 20 degrees cooler up there. It's beautiful.
Oh, nice.
So that might be, just, it's coming. We can see it coming. Heat is one of these things that you can kind of see coming ahead of time, and we can kind of prepare for it. So be thinking things through. A lot of people, don't work on the weekends, so they like to do outdoor plans. So if you have to do yard cleaning, if you're doing a 5K or anything like that, make sure you do it in the morning or in the evening after the sun is set. Do those chores. Don't do it. I was out mowing today at 1 o'clock, and I was thinking to myself, this is probably not the wisest thing to do. And but at the same time, it hasn't turned super hot here. I would not be doing that this weekend when it was 10 degrees warmer and we were pushing 105 degrees. Because I think it's Paul that said that, or maybe it was Alex that said, you get out, the heat exhaustion, heat stroke sneaks up on you. and before you know it, you're a little dizzy, you're feeling dehydrated, and boom, it just hits you like a ton of bricks all of a sudden. And it is either heat exhaustion or heat stroke are serious medical conditions, and they need to be looked at right away, especially heat stroke. You need to call 911. You need to get to a medical facility immediately to take precaution, because heat stroke in particular can kill you. So we are looking at heat coming up this week. So this was a very fortuitous kind of time to talk about heat. So later on this week, we're going to see some very hot temperatures across the Southwest. So I see by the clock, it's been an hour. You guys have done great. You two have stuck it through. I think Alex was having bandwidth issues and Paul had to drop off. Real quickly, as we wrap things up, what are your final words of advice to everybody? And I'll start with Miss Marissa first.
Again, everything we've said, I think, was really great. We touched on so many things, sunscreen, hydrate, cooling centers, the buddy system, check on your buddy, your next door neighbor, bring the pets inside or find them a cool area, all those things, sunscreen, lighter clothing, go up to the mountains and have some fun this weekend. If you're in El Paso, you can pick cherries in New Mexico. It's a great way to get
very nice.
Yes. So anything, all of those things are really great things that we touched on in this weekend. We are going to see those warm temperatures, so just be prepared. We've warned you.
That's right. And that forewarned. I mean, that's, like I said, it's not going to sneak up on anybody. It's there, and just take precautions and plan ahead of time. Dan, what are some final words from you?
Just, again, plan ahead and be safe, especially if you have outdoor activities planned. Make sure you bring lots of water and know where your cooling stations or access to air conditioning are. Like I said, we have the Electric Daisy Carnival coming up next weekend. You're going to have 100,000 people out there overnight. If you're one of them, or if you know one of them, make sure they know about it and they can tell everyone out there. They will have additional cooling stations out there and additional water available out there. So just make sure you know your resources. You know what to do when you start feeling that heat exhaustion. You will make sure you get somewhere safe and somewhere where you can keep hydrated real quick.
Very true. And again, I'll stress, we should not be seeing any children die in cars ever during the summer or during any time of the year. So be sure and check the back seat, beat the heat, check the back seat, or look before you lock. Whatever it takes to remember. I don't care. Whatever little saying, if you have to leave your cell phone back there, a briefcase like Miss Marissa said, anything like that, to kind of trick yourself, because it is true, and I understand that we have busy lives and we get distracted, but there can be no excuse for that. Our children are our responsibility; they're gifts from God, and we need to take care of them. So we can't be just forgetting about them and leaving them in the car. So that's my big stress, is that please check, make sure your kids are, if you have to drop them off at daycare, make sure they're dropped off at daycare or at grandma, grandpa's house, wherever you're taking them. Don't leave your pets. Don't forget your pets. Don't leave them in the car. If they're at home, make sure they have a shade and a place to get water as well. So very good. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Miss Marissa from El Paso, myself, I'm also her coworker from El Paso. We had Dan Burke as a WCM from Las Vegas. Alex Tardy was a WCM from San Diego. He had to drop off. And Paul Iniquiaz was from the Phoenix office. And I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. Remember, we've got 4 more Hangouts to do, 1 each night. So same time tomorrow. Just check your Weather Office's social media channel. They should be posting these on there so that you can join in the conversation if you'd like. But tomorrow we're going to be talking about downburst winds. Wednesday is going to be blowing dust, and I know for sure we have a special guest on Wednesday who's been doing a lot of research in blowing dust. On Thursday, we're going to be we have another guest talking on lightning. Ron Hawley from Vaisala will be talking, and then on Friday, we'll be talking flash flooding. So we still got a lot of great topics to cover, a lot of important topics, because we want to keep you safe as we go through this Monsoon Awareness Week. And by the time we get to the end of Monsoon Awareness Week, The monsoon season will have officially started. It starts officially on June 15th, and we'll be immediately looking at this number one, the one topic we talked about today, the heat. This weekend, the story is going to be the heat across the Southwest. So prepare for it now, be ready for it, and be safe. So I want to thank everyone for joining us again today, and I'll hopefully see you all tomorrow. So have a good evening.